You wake up when your body is ready, no alarm, no schedule, no inbox waiting. For 99% of human history, this wasn't a luxury. This was simply Tuesday. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors lived without clocks, without buses, without a single obligation before sunrise. So, what exactly did they do with all that time? The answer is going to make you question everything you think you know about work. Yes. And what it means to be human. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Your ancestors were not busy. Not in the way you are. Not even close. Richard Lee, the Canadian anthropologist who spent years living with the Kungsan, a group of hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, published a landmark study in 1968 that stunned the academic world. He calculated that the Kong adults worked an average of just 17 hours per week to meet all their nutritional needs. 17 hours. That is less than 3 hours a day. The rest was theirs. Lee called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society, not because they were rich in things, but because they were rich in time. They had more of it than almost any human alive today. So the day begins, not at a fixed hour, but when the body says so. Light filters through leaves or through the mouth of a rock shelter. You open your eyes not to a beeping sound, but to birdsong, to rain, to the slow brightening of sky. And your sleep wasn't the solid, unbroken 8 hours you've been told you need. Sleep researcher Jerome Siegel spent years studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Chimene of Bolivia. And what he found was remarkable. All of them slept in two distinct waves, separated by a quiet interval in the middle of the night. None of these groups had a word for insomnia. They slept when it was dark. They woke when it was light. And sometimes they lay awake at night simply being present in the world. You don't jump up. There is no urgency. You sit near the fire, which someone fed before dawn. You eat something left from the evening before. A root, a piece of dried meat, a handful of berries stored in a folded leaf. Breakfast was whatever existed, not whatever you chose. Then the day actually starts. For roughly 4 to 6 hours, there is work. But calling it work in the modern sense would be misleading. The anthropologist James Sussman, who spent years studying the hoansi San of Namibia, described their foraging as something closer to a walk with purpose. Women, who in most hunter-gatherer societies provided the majority of the group's calories, moved through terrain they had known since childhood, gathering tubers, fruits, nuts, and wild plants. They did not move alone. They moved in small groups, stopping when something interesting appeared. The gathering was social. It was unhurried. Sussman documented that hoansi women could identify hundreds of edible plant species and knew exactly where to find each one at every point in the seasonal cycle. That knowledge was not written anywhere. It lived in memory, passed mother to daughter across thousands of generations. Men hunted, but not every day. In most documented hunter-gatherer groups, men hunted 2 or 3 days per week at most. Some hunts lasted a few hours. Others stretched across days. The technique of persistence hunting, running an animal down until it collapsed from heat exhaustion, appears in the archaeological record going back at least 200,000 years, with evidence found at sites like the Blombos Cave in South Africa. It required not brute strength, but endurance and deep reading of the landscape. You tracked the direction of crushed grass, dried blood, the behavior of birds circling overhead. You knew your terrain the way you knew your own hands. And then the hunt ended. You carried back what you could, and the community gathered. This is where the day shifts, because the afternoon in your ancestors' world looked almost nothing like yours. There was no second shift, no commute, no inbox to return to. The work was finished, and what followed was something that social scientists have struggled to place inside any modern category. You rested, not as a treat, not as a reward you had to earn. Rest was a structural part of the day. In warm climates, the midday hours were simply not hours for labor. Children played without structure or supervision. Hunter-gatherer children learn by watching, by imitating, by failing safely. A child of 6 might already know how to start a fire. Nobody scheduled it. Nobody graded it. You maintained your tools. You sharpened a hand axe. wove grass into a basket, repaired a leather cord. This was not tedious production line repetition. It was skilled, quiet, meditative work that left your mind free to wander. And you were with people. You groomed someone, or someone groomed you. This is not as trivial as it sounds. The evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar, whose research into the relationship between primate brain size and social group structure gave us what is now called Dunbar's number, has argued that grooming was the original social glue of primate life. For early humans, language evolved partly as a way to scale grooming, to bond with more people at once through talk rather than touch. But touch never disappeared. To be touched was to be trusted. To be known was to be safe. The sun drops, the fire rises, and this is where the most important thing happens. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the hoansi and published a landmark analysis in 2014 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. She recorded and categorized thousands of hours of conversation among hunter-gatherer groups. During daylight hours, talk was practical. Food, tools, logistics, disputes. But at night, around the fire, the conversation transformed entirely. 81% of nighttime talk was stories, myths, recollections of hunts and long journeys, the behavior of animals they had tracked, the history of people who were long dead. Imagined futures? Wiesner's argument was striking. This storytelling was not merely entertainment. It was the cognitive technology your ancestors used to build shared identity, extend social networks beyond the immediate group, and transmit values and knowledge across generations. Stories were the medium through which everything important traveled. The campfire was where your ancestors became human, not just physically, but culturally. You ate communally. This was not generosity as a virtue. It was survival as a system. On any given day, your caloric return from the hunt or the gather was uncertain. So was everyone else's. By sharing automatically and unconditionally, the group smoothed out the variance. Someone who returned empty-handed today fed others who returned empty-handed tomorrow. In the economics of prehistoric life, sharing was not idealism. It was the most rational strategy available. Then the fire burned lower. The story slowed. Sleep came again. Now here is the thing that should stop you cold. The phrase most commonly used to describe prehistoric life comes from the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who wrote in 1651 that life in the state of nature was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes wrote this without ever meeting a hunter-gatherer. He based it entirely on political theory and imagination, and decades of rigorous anthropological fieldwork have systematically dismantled it. Your ancestors were not in constant terror. They were not perpetually teetering on the edge of starvation. The data collected from studies of hundreds of hunter-gatherer groups across 6 continents tells a consistent story. They had more leisure time than you do. They worked less. They slept more. They spent more hours in unscheduled, face-to-face human contact than any office worker, any factory employee, any person glued to a commute or a screen has in modern life. Psychologists measure something called time affluence, the subjective sense that you have enough time for the things that matter. Hunter-gatherers had it in abundance. You are descended from people who had enough time. And somewhere in the 10,000 years since the agricultural revolution, since your ancestors traded the forest and the open plain for the field, the fence, and eventually the open plan office, enough time became the rarest thing on earth. Think about your own day. Your alarm fires at a fixed hour your biology never asked for. You work 8, 9, 10 hours inside a building with no sky. You eat in a hurry, often alone, often while looking at something that isn't the person across from you. You lie awake at 2 in the morning wondering if you're producing enough, achieving enough, keeping up. You feel, most days, that there is simply not enough time. Your body has no framework for this. It was built for something else entirely. It was built for 4 hours of purposeful movement, hours of rest, an evening of fire and story and shared food and the faces of people who knew your name. You wake up when your body is ready. For 300,000 years, that was the only alarm that existed, and the life that followed it. Slow, social, purposeful, unhurried. was not a rough draft of the life you're living now. It was the original, and something deep in you, older than language, still remembers what it felt like.